Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Friday Reflections. Let me get my camera set up here right. Whew. Long time no see. So I've been away for a little while. Has anything happened? So if it's your first time today, hey, I took December and January off, and let me introduce myself. My name's Peter Bolland. I'm a professor of philosophy and humanities, and I teach world religions and Asian philosophy and world mythology at Southwestern College. I'm the department chair down there, and just wrapping up my first week of the spring semester. We're 100% online, so I'm online a lot, and I'm glad to be online here with you this morning for our San Diego Oasis Zoom meeting. This is Friday Reflections, and Friday Reflections is a program that began last May. Simona said, hey, why don't you do just a casual kind of weekly thing, and you don't have to do PowerPoint and write a whole lecture, write curriculum, just do more of a topical philosophical musings, inquiry, current events, poetry, whatever's moving through our hearts and minds this week. And I was scared. I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. Just sort of improv for a half hour. But we started doing it last June or May or June, and we've been doing it every Friday since. Now, I did take December and January off just to kind of chill and to kind of go into my bear cave and hibernate for a while and finish some other pressing projects. But I'm so excited to be back, and we are locked in for every Friday for the foreseeable future. We just booked, me and Brandon, we just booked through June. So I'll be here every Friday, and I hope that many of you will choose to join us every Friday as well. It's what is Friday Reflections? Well, it's a lot of things. It's a chance for us to reach back into some of the wisdom traditions that the world has left for us and look for tools that we can apply in the here and now of our struggle today, and of our joy, of our suffering, of our individual challenges, of our sort of collective social challenges. So I hope that, we have a little fun at Friday Reflections and feel something. And I always like to close with a poem, and today's no exception, because poetry really cracks me open and really connects my heart and my head. And that's something that's an occupational hazard in my business in philosophy. We tend to be too cerebral. And it's so nice to kind of look for ways. That's why I love playing guitar, and why I love reading poetry and writing poetry, and anything I can do to kind of awaken that part of me that is not my conceptual mind. That's why I meditate. It's why we walk. It's why we do yoga. And it's why we pray. So I'm all about all that stuff too. And I like to integrate all of that. And that's what we do here in Friday Reflections. So before we jump into some things I've been thinking about this week, quick announcement about some of my upcoming events. And many of you already know this, but next Tuesday, and that is February 9th. Do you say February? Is the R silent? Or do you say February, which sounds weird? Anyway, Feb 9, next week. Join me for my first webinar of the year. And that's going to be an official 90-minute webinar with PowerPoint and 60-minute of me presenting. And the last 30 minutes we save for Q&A. And the topic next Tuesday is going to be one that some of you have worked on with me before. It's called Dismantling Racism One Insight at a Time. So join me for that. It's Black History Month. Perfect time to bring that topic back around again. It never gets old for me. And it's such an important and rich applied philosophy discussion. It's like looking inside, looking under the hood to see what the roots of racism are inside of all of us and how to bring those out into the light so we can start to become aware of them and start to change them. And then 2 weeks from Tuesday, on February 23rd, a sort of a companion piece, but they're both standalone webinars. They're not a sequential class. But toward the end of February, on the 23rd, I'm going to do another webinar about anti-racism work. It's called Why It's So Hard to Talk About Racism. And it won't, it'll be the same slides as last time, but I don't read from a script or use notes. And so it'll come out quite differently. And every time I go through it, I feel like I learn new things, even though I'm the guy doing it. So yeah, but these are not brand new webinars. We did offer them last year, and some of you may have already experienced them. Send your friends over, folks who might be interested and have an open mind about thinking more deeply uh, about how racism affects us all, regardless of your ethnicity and your race. So those are just some of the things. And of course, as I already mentioned at the top, Friday Reflections is booked and locked in for February and March, and we're building the calendars on beyond that. So register for all of those too. Thank you so much for being here. Your patronage and support of San Diego Oasis is what keeps us going. San Diego Oasis is still paying enormous retail space rent on that big, beautiful Grossmont Center space that we just built last year, and it's been empty for a year. And it's going to be empty for some time longer. Help us keep the doors open of Oasis in general through your generous support of programs like this. And those of you that can and want to donate even further, you know how to get a hold of Simona and the folks at Oasis to help out in that way as well. But just your presence here today is enough and is a wonderful, wonderful gift to us. And we hope to return the favor and not waste your time and have this be a useful session. So let's jump into what I want to think about with you today. Can we talk about January 6th? And I know that Friday Reflections is not a political program. It's not a news commentary program, but those of you that have been with me all along know that I can't help but bring philosophy out of the safe space of the conceptual abstractions that it normally resides in and bring it down here to the street where our pain really is. And like a lot of you on January 6th, I watched in horror live as the United States Capitol was overrun by what at first appeared to be just an enthusiastic protest. And then quickly, as the cell phone footage continued to be revealed in the days following, it quickly became clear that while there maybe were some people there that were just swept up in the party atmosphere, there was a significant percentage of people there who came there deliberately, premeditatedly, and with extensive planning, with hundreds of zip ties in their backpack, with automatic weapons, with bear spray, with stun guns. And as they chanted, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," saying brazenly into cell phone footage, "Yeah, we're looking for Nancy Pelosi so we can put a bullet in that bitch's head." I sat there in my living room watching this. I wanted to throw up. It made me profoundly sick, physically ill. And my response was to get mad. My response was to match that ugly intensity with my own ugly intensity, to push back on that ideologically and to rage against that rage. But in the weeks that have followed, I've come to recognize that my feelings have evolved on the whole thing. And at one point, watching that footage on January 6th, that Wednesday morning or midday Wednesday, suddenly EMT workers were wheeling out on a gurney a woman who was bleeding from the mouth. And they went right by the camera, and Katie Tur on MSNBC stopped the interview and said, "Wait a minute, you guys, what is happening here? Who is that woman going by?" Later, we learned that that woman was Ashley Babbitt. And Ashley Babbitt was from San Diego. She was 35 years old. And she'd become increasingly radicalized over the last few years. And I've sort of studied Ashley Babbitt quite a bit. She was the first casualty of the January 6th insurrection, the MAGA riot. And the following day or the day after, I learned in the San Diego Union Tribune that Ashley Babbitt is someone I know. She's my pool lady. I've spoken to her on the phone a number of times, booking pool maintenance. I've emailed with her a number of times. She and her business partners own Fowler's Pool Service. And Fowler's Pool Service is a pool service Lori and I inherited when we bought this house back in 2003. Fowler's Pool Service was the pool service of this house since 1968. A previous owner used them, and it was a family business owned by the Fowler business, the Fowler family. The Fowlers retired. They aged out. They retired. They sold the company to a new group of people, one of whom was Ashley Babbitt. Oh, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. And that's how I got to deal with Ashley Babbitt. Well, we set up an annual pool maintenance thing. I send her a big check in December, and that covers the whole rest of the year. I'm already paid up for 2021. They come once a month. They help me keep the filter cleared and maintained and all that stuff. So my first response when I learned that my CEO, the CEO of a service provider in my home, was not only kind of a right-wing extremist, but she actually participated in an armed assault on the Capitol. And what we see in the footage is Ashley Babbitt, when the rioters got up to the second floor and they started to break into the House chamber, it's called, where the House of Representatives meet. And someone smashed open that window, and Ashley Babbitt said, "Give me a lift." And they pushed her up, and she was literally crawling through the window, through the door, into the House of Representatives, where my friend Sarah Jacobs, my friend and Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs, and hundreds of other House members were cowering and fearing for their lives. And, the House Speaker had been whisked away across the building in the Senate chamber, Mike Pence. 30 seconds before the rioters broke into the Senate chamber, Mike Pence had been whisked away to safety. The chant that was that was the crowd that was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." So it's clear that this was an armed revolution with the intent of zip tying and kidnapping and perhaps executing the people who represent us. They pushed Ashley Babbitt through that window. And inside, maybe you've seen those photos too, all those Capitol Sergeant of Arms, Capitol Police in suits, not in police uniforms with the handguns drawn. One of them put a single round right into her neck. And in the cell phone footage, you see her falling back and on the floor and blood coming from her mouth. She died a short time later. So my pool lady was an enemy combatant who attacked the United States of America and was killed. This is a woman with a 14-year career in the United States Air Force, whose job was security, like the people she was attacking, whose job was guarding Air Force gates in uniform for the United States of America. And as I dove into some research about Ashley, I learned some amazing things. She was an Obama voter like me, an enthusiastic Obama supporter. But when Donald Trump came along in 2015 and started running for the 2016 election, she didn't like Hillary and she went with Trump. And then over the last year, she became increasingly radicalized. You see this all in her social media, which has been carefully cataloged by a number of news outlets, and I've been pouring through it, watching her homemade cell phone videos of her driving down the road, filming herself, ranting about illegal aliens crawling over the wall, ranting about Gavin Newsom is Satan, ranting about Nancy Pelosi, and then all the QAnon stuff, Pizzagate, Democrats are pedophiles, the whole thing. And so she became clearly radicalized, and it cost her her life. And there are so many things I want to think about with you about this morning. I think I'm gravitating toward this story because she's a microcosm about what's happened in our country, about how we no longer have two political parties. We have two planets, two worlds, two profoundly different world views. And while I want to think about her as an individual, as a microcosm, 72 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. And of that, a majority, 57 million Americans believe that the election was stolen. 57 million Americans believe that the administration of Joe Biden is a false government And a number of radicalized people among that 57 million believes that the only recourse left is violent revolution against an illegitimate government. They believe they're the patriots. They believe they're saving America from evil Democrats who eat children, drink their blood, and so on. Jews who shoot space lasers at California and cause forest fires. These are the things that Ashley Babbitt believed. And these are the things, if you follow the news, that Marjorie Taylor Greene believes, although she tried yesterday on the House floor to disavow her previous statements. But yeah. So I'm thinking about this philosophically. Otherwise, I just kind of melt into a puddle of ineffectuality and impotence, and I don't know what to do, and impotent rage, really. But in philosophy, we think about what draws people to ideologies like that. And you could do a sort of Jungian deep dive and think maybe it's a kind of spiritual emptiness. She spent 14 years in the Air Force, retired from the Air Force, came back to San Diego. Her and some partners bought this pool company. They quickly lost control of that. News reports show that Ashley Babbitt applied for a $60,000 loan as soon as they bought that company, the pool company. And then immediately she stopped making payments on that $60,000 loan. So she was in arrears and in collections and being sued by that loan provider. And perhaps she was just not cut out for business. And I don't know her, and I'm really trying to hesitate diagnosing her. I'm simply using her as an example from what I've learned from news reports and what I know from her own self-disclosure on social media, and what I know from just talking to her a few times. She was lovely, and her emails were extremely professional. And it's a great pool company. And by the way, a few weeks after the riot, after the insurrection, the Fowler's pool truck pulls in front of my house. And this older guy, looks like he's in his mid 70s or so. He's my pool boy, my pool man. And I'm like, I got to go talk to him. So I walked down the sidewalk and he saw me coming and he got out of his truck and we had our masks on. And I think he looked a little afraid because I bet they're getting fired by a lot of people. And I didn't really know what was going to come out of my mouth, but I walked up to him. His name's Bill. I said, Bill, I'm sorry for your loss. I just wanted to say that. He looked like he was grieving. His whole body language was just hangdog. And I said, dude, I'm so sorry for the suffering that your company is going through and that your family is going through right now. And he looked me in the eye and he said, Peter, she was my niece. I went, oh my God. And it just humanized the whole thing for me. This is a family that is grieving. This is Ashley's uncle who comes and does my pool. And this is what Thomas Merton says about what may have driven Ashley to this. I'm reading a book called The New Seeds of Contemplation by Thomas Merton. I'm on a big Thomas Merton kick. I'll talk about that on an upcoming Friday. But this passage, I was just reading this book and it leaped off the page yesterday as a possible way of thinking about how people get radicalized into these, for you and I, completely wacky conspiracy theories that are so patently, obviously false. More on that in a moment. But here's what Merton says. There are many other escapes from the external self, the sort of an existential question, like getting away from myself. He says there's lots of ways to get away from that sort of soul sickness within us. For instance, the experience of being seized and taken out of oneself by collective enthusiasm in a totalitarian parade. The self-righteous upsurge of party loyalty that blots out conscience and absolves every criminal tendency in the name of class, nation, party, race, or sect. The danger and the attraction of these false mystiques is precisely that they seduce and pretend to satisfy those who are no longer aware of any deep or genuine spiritual need. Burton goes on, the false mysticism of the mass society captivates men and women who are so alienated from themselves and from God that they no longer are capable of genuine spiritual experience. Yet it is precisely these ersatz forms, these false forms of enthusiasm, that are opium for the people, deadening their awareness of the deepest and most personal needs, alienating them from their true selves, putting conscience and personality to sleep, and turning free, reasonable men and women into passive instruments of the power politician. I read that, I'm like, and Thomas Merton's writing that in the early 60s, right? So very different context, but as it says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. So Donald Trump began to assert that if I lose the election, you know it's rigged. He began to assert that a year ago, last spring. And then once the election happened that night, of course, every day since then, he's been asserting that he won in a landslide, that the Democrats lied, that they stole the election, that it's, stop the steal. That was one of the things the chanters were granting. And one of the things the rioters wanted to do was break into the Senate chamber and grab the box that had all the Electoral College votes in it. Because Biden, of course, won the Electoral College, right? And some of you know, I had the privilege and honor of being one of California's 55 electors. So literally 2 pieces of paper that I had signed, one for Joe Biden and one for Kamala Harris, in Sacramento on December 14th, was in the Senate chamber. Luckily, according to accounts I've read, a couple of Senate staffers had the foresight to grab that box and run it out of the room before the rioters got in, because they were looking for it, because they were going to destroy the Electoral College votes. They wanted to overturn a free and fair democratic election. Don't let anybody talk you out of the obvious fact that this was a military coup. Failed, but a coup nonetheless. And so Trump's repeated assertions that he's still the president, that he won, and that Biden was not the president, were of course echoed throughout the right-wing echo chamber, Fox News somewhat, but really mostly the new kids on the block, Newsmax and OAN, One America Network, housed to our shame right here in San Diego, which kept repeating the voter fraud. Now they're all being sued by the voter machine manufacturers. We'll see how that goes. But it worked. It successfully lulled 57 million Americans, our neighbors, our service providers, the people we shop next to at the grocery store, sit next to at church, well, when we used to go to church, our fellow Americans who believe this lie. And in philosophy, we have a tool to tell the difference between a lie and a truth. It's called defining knowledge correctly. Knowledge is justified true belief. Justified means there's evidence that any rational person would accept, and the information is true. And so that's when that belief becomes true and justified. You can believe that the moon is made of green cheese. You can believe that Hillary Clinton runs a pedophile ring out of the basement of a pizza restaurant in Washington, D.C., which doesn't even have a basement. You can believe that, but that belief isn't true because there's no evidence to support it. So over 80 trials now, over 80 court cases have found that there was no evidence of voter fraud. Many of those judges, Trump appointees. But none of that matters. Truth doesn't matter, because Donald Trump was able to actually tap into an old propaganda trick that Caligula and Nero first perfected and wrote about 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, and Hermann Goebbels, Adolf Hitler's minister of propaganda, plagiarized, picked up, and used. And those 2 simple tricks of propaganda are: people will believe a bigger lie more quickly than they will a small lie. And if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes true. So the big lie that the election was stolen, that's how Ashley Babbitt died. This is an epistemological problem. This is a problem of what is true and what is not true. and I don't know how to fix it. I don't offer prescriptions here in Friday Reflections. It's important that we think through these things and ask these questions and live in the discomfort of these questions. It's crucial because you and I both have family members who believe the big lie. And I've pretty much pulled off of Facebook. I don't argue on social media anymore. But, that doesn't solve the problem, but it saves my soul from unnecessary distress. But there is much to celebrate. And truth is still real. And when I stood out there with Ashley Babbitt's uncle on the sidewalk in the January sun, I made a commitment to myself that I would pray for Ashley Babbitt. I don't hate Ashley Babbitt. I see her rage. She got caught up in a lie. And the Buddhists teach us that everything causes everything else. Everything arises concomitantly. It isn't just Donald Trump's fault, although he's going on trial in the Senate next week, second president in American history to be impeached twice. We know this Republican Senate won't convict him, but he's being held at least accountable for history. But it isn't just his fault. The news networks helped. And then the soul emptiness of people who the lost sheep who gravitate to these crazy stories, they're ready to be brought into this lie. So I want to close today, not on those dark notes of chaos and confusion, but with a poem. And the poem I want to share with you is the most famous poem in America right now. If you watch the inauguration, you've already heard it read by its author, 22-year-old African-American poet. Her name is Amanda Gorman. I mentioned her age and race because it's relevant in the poem. I want to read into the record her miraculous poem just because I need it. I freaking need it. I bawled like a baby when I watched her read it. And when I watched Lady Gaga sing the national anthem, and when I watched that Marine walk her down the steps, this was civic ritual that was so healing to me after what had happened there just the week before. So I want to read Ashley Gorman's poem, and then we'll wrap up. It's called The Hill We Climb. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet, the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together victorious. Not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. This effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we must, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over this catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left behind. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the golden hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. In every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country, our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. If only for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Ashley Gorman, The Hill We Climb. Thanks for being here with us today on Friday Reflections. See you next time, my friends.